All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this lovely afternoon. I'm Matt of Mysterious Galaxy, and I am joined tonight by Andy Mientus, who
Hi,
is the author of Fraternity, which is coming out on Tuesday.
that's this. Hi,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for holding that up because my ebook arc of it is not as impressive to look at.
You can really see the scale,
Yeah.
It's really nice.
It's a very, very pretty cover, I have to say. I love the color palette of it. Sets a nice tone.
Thanks a lot.
So you maybe already know Andy, but let me give a little brief bio here. Andy is a writer and actor best known for his work in the Broadway musicals Spring Awakening, Les Mis, and Wicked, three of my personal favorites. And on the television in The Flash, Smash, unintentional rhyming there, and the upcoming Netflix series Grendel. And he is the author of the young adult novel Fraternity, which we're talking about today, and 3 Backstagers novels, which are based on the Boom comics. He lives in New York City, but is currently on the Best Coast with us.
One might say, yes.
One might say, if they were biased, it's not like a factually correct statement or anything.
We're off to a really good start here. Really good
I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Well, anyways, thank you for joining me, Andy. How excited are you to launch the book on Tuesday?
I am so excited. It is it's a culmination of a lot of years of dreaming this up and learning how to write a book, and going through the process of writing and publishing the Backstagers, and then really sitting down and finally getting the time to really tell this story that I've had to tell for quite some time during the pandemic. So now that I'm really meeting the atmosphere again, and I'm traveling for this book tour and back to work, to have this now finally complete and actually going to be in people's hands is so surreal to me. It's really amazing. I'm really excited.
So we were talking a little bit backstage, and you said Fraternity is being described as Dead Poet Society meets The Craft.
Yes, which I'm realizing is movies. I don't know what the books.
That's okay.
What comps might be, but yeah, it's a good old, as the kids would say, dark academia, boarding school, autumnal drama, but with a healthy dose of queerness and a healthy dose of paranormal weirdness. And so and then a little sprinkling of history and hopefully a little bit of education as well. So it's a few different things in the cauldron, but hopefully it's the perfect book to start off your spooky season and read with a hot cup of tea and a sweater and a gloomy day. That's how I recommend cracking it open.
It kind of sneaks up on you if you don't read the back and you just have a vague sense of what it is, and the spookiness really starts out slow. So you did a great job easing us into the season.
Thanks. Yeah, I really wanted it, as I said, it's a lot of things at once, right? It is this paranormal thing. It is a school drama where we're just seeing kids dealing with being in school in the ways that you're kind of used to. It is set in 1991, which is a really potent time politically and culturally, and our characters are thrust into some both imaginary circumstances and some quite real historic circumstances. And so there's a lot at once, but at the core of it, I really wanted it to be character driven, and I really wanted you to feel like by the end of it, you really know these people, and that no matter where I take the plot, which is sort of unusually varied, I think, for a book like this, you're grounded in really knowing who is at the center of this story. And so, yeah, you say slow burn. It doesn't get spooky for a little while, not to spoil too much, but I really want you to meet the people and know the world well before we start to go someplace crazy. So,
like you said, there's a lot going on, a lot of elements you pulled from, but where did this initial idea for Fraternity come from?
Yeah. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. public school, nothing special. But as you mentioned in the intro, my other life is as an actor. And so the summer of between my sophomore and junior years of high school, I was accepted to a summer boarding school for the arts at a college campus in like northern Pennsylvania. And so I had never been in a place like that before. This, like, if you picture just like what you think of as like an ivy clad, like old college campus, stained glass windows, stone buildings, like that Gothic sort of thing in the middle of the woods. I was there, which was so like unusual to me as a setting. And then it was an arts boarding school. So I was surrounded by people who just were very different than who I was growing up around. And it was kind of my first introduction to queer people my age, queer identities, and different ways of self-expression, different ways of expressing masculinity. You know, at the time, I was not yet out, and I was years away from sort of awakening to myself and my identity. But I knew that something wasn't right. You know what I mean? I had that experience that so many of us have, where it was just like square peg, round hole. I didn't fit in. I didn't know how to fit in. I didn't know why I was different yet. I was bullied. And I remember arriving there knowing that I was going to be like living in a boys' dorm with, you know, other boys. I was going to have a roommate for the first time, and just thinking like, this is my chance to be like one of the guys. Like, I'm going to like learn how to have male friends, which I never did. I always was like sitting at the girls' table and, you know, not into anything. I wasn't able to connect with any of the like guys in my school about anything really. We had nothing in common. And over the course of this summer, I did become one of the guys, but not at all in the way that I expected. I became friends with the queer boys, and, you know, learned, oh, there's like a whole different way to feel that same like kindredness, that same thing that seemed to come so easily to like these guys that I would see, you know, like on the whatever sport ball team, having that easy kind of masculinity with each other that it just felt so locked out from me. Like, I was like, oh, this is available to us too. It's just, it takes a minute to find it. And this was, of course, in the days pre-internet, pre-smartphones, pre-social media, like not easy to find. You had to find it in real life, which was scary and risky. And this boarding school was also famously haunted. And so I've been trying to tell that story for a really long time. And I tried to tell it set exactly when that happened to me, which was like the mid 2000s. I tried to set it now, which was embarrassing because like, I don't know how kids talk today, you know, like I'm a grown man, and it's very different now. Like, it's thankfully very different, that coming out is a very different experience. Getting information is a very different experience. So I chose 1991 because I thought if I went back even, you know, one generation prior to my own, I could really also hit some really important history lessons that I wish had been available to me growing up, just to know fully what I would become a part of, you know, by coming into this community, by realizing that I've always been a part of this community, that I was born into this community. That comes with a lot. And there were things that I didn't learn until much later in my adult life that I wish had been just sort of introduced to me earlier, so that I understood the full gravity of that, the full joy of that, and was armed with some more like lessons in survival and how to thrive in this community that weren't so available to me at the time. So that was the genesis of the story, and that's why it's here. Yeah.
So we see some of those, you know, doubts and relationships building, playing out in this book with our three main characters. We've got the initial point of view from Zoe, which is a great reference to Franny and Zoe. And then we've got Daniel and Leo.
Yes.
Very diverse cast of storytellers and main characters here. But did you also get invited to a secret society in your summer boarding school experience? Because, you know.
Yeah, so that is my sort of like fictionalized, romanticized, sort of extrapolated version of what was going on at that boarding school, which is that like the gay boys were all hanging out in this one room that and like some of those guys knew exactly who they were and were very comfortable with who they were, because these were kids from all over the state, right? So there were kids from like Philadelphia and like, but then there were kids from like the middle of the state and like these rural pockets that like weren't so exposed to things. So there was like a wide diversity of like levels of comfort and outness and awareness of what, you know, each guy's sort of identity was. But there was, regardless, this blanket of like acceptance and being cool with like everyone figuring it out. And so even if like, if you went to that party, if you went to that dorm room, you know, you weren't necessarily one of those boys, but, you know, if you were, that was cool. And, you know, we all sort of were like trying to feel out like the elephant in the room, this thing that we weren't naming, but was there. And yeah, it wasn't quite as glamorous as the party that my characters find themselves in this book. But it was, you know, the Pennsylvania version of it.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the three main characters and how you write from each of their perspectives. But before we do that, you know, Banned Book Week is coming up. This is a very, you know, unapologetically queer story. And we know that a lot of the books that are being banned and targeted are stories about the queer community. So as the writer of this, and you know, thinking back to your own childhood, like, what does a story like this mean to you to be able to tell? And you know, you said backstage that you really hope that this gets banned. Why do you want this to get banned?
I mean, I don't want it to get banned because obviously I want it to be in as many hands as possible. But I do. You said unapologetically queer, and that's exactly right. Like I have an author's note at the beginning because this book is set in 1991, and I wanted to write about that time unflinchingly and use the reality of the language of the time, of the public, you know, opinion of queer people at the time, of race, of just a lot of stuff that is thankfully different now, but then was just much different. And I thought that it would be, you know, unhelpful to sort of water that down for this story. And so I think that if, you know, this book is released and is not seen by these groups who are targeting these kinds of books to ban as exactly the kind of thing they are against, then I've done something wrong, because I really wanted to, look at it with an unflinching gaze, with wide open eyes, with utter honesty and frankness. And I hope that I've done that. And so, if it doesn't get banned, then I feel like I'll have missed some elemental part of talking about these things.
A lot of times these stories like this get banned because they use the language that you do, and they contain that, and it gets banned under the pretense, oh, we have to protect the kids from this. And a lot of this is about protecting the kids, right? But you were writing a YA book, you were writing about kids at these boarding schools. So you know, what would you say to people who have that sort of like, we need to protect kids from these stories?
I want to believe that everybody who feels that strongly is coming to these conversations in good faith, even if I think they're completely wrong and seeing queerness the wrong way. Like, I can't argue with wanting to protect kids. That sounds awesome. I think we have different ideas about what that means. What I would say is that no book that I had growing up talked about queer identity, and certainly didn't use like the F slur, for example, that pops up quite a bit in my book. And that didn't protect me from having that slur lobbed at me every single day. You know what I mean? So talking about it and having an awareness of it, and having that conversation come from somebody who lived through it, I think will actually protect your child if your child does turn out to be queer, because they will be faced with these things without a doubt. And so I want to think, you know, I do think that some of these people do actually just hold a lot of hate in their heart, and it's not about protecting kids. It's about silencing people who they don't like or don't agree with. But if they earnestly just want to protect kids, I would say this is like maybe a way to protect kids that you haven't considered because you can't see it this way. Like if your kid turns out to be queer, this might be a way you can protect them by giving them knowledge and history and context.
The really cool part about how you are telling the story is that you're telling it from 3 different perspectives, right?
Yes.
So we get Zoe, who is the new kid, has maybe a bit of a mysterious past.
Yes.
We've got Daniel, who's got the rich father that he's trying to, not disappoint. And then we've got Leo, who is pretty out, rocking out to Vogue and refers to herself in the third person. So you not only get all of these different perspectives on what it means to be queer in this setting, but also you're getting the sort of inner lives and the outer perspective of those inner lives. Like the way that Leo sees Zoe is so different from the Zoe that we see the world through his eyes. Zoe is a very funny, very self-deprecating, and to Leo, Zoe is like bland, like so bland.
Yeah. So a few things that you're touching on, which I think is important to impart to these potential readers who are with us today, is that, so the book is told through a rotating cast of narrators in the first person. So we start the book narrated from one character, Zoe's point of view, short for Zachary. Zoe Orson is his name. And yes, in Zoe's inner voice and his inner monologue as he's navigating his first days at this new school, he is very funny and self-deprecating and kind of deadpan and very, very funny. Then we shift POVs to Daniel, who is somebody totally different, who has been at the school, but comes from a different background than a lot of the other students. He's the only Black student at the school. He's new money as opposed to old money. So some of the kids think he doesn't quite deserve to be there. And we only see Zoe in that chapter through his eyes. I wanted to use 3 different narrators and have them have as many things different from each other as possible to sort of highlight how many ways one can be a queer person. That like one of my favorite things about being part of this community is how intersectional it is, that it encompasses every class, every level of ability, every race, everything. We can all share this one thing, queerness, in common while being so different. And so if you track between the 3 characters, they kind of have nothing in common otherwise. They have like everything else different from each other. And yet they have this thing in common. And so they come together, but they also are constantly observing each other and the people around them through that lens of where they come from and who they are, which is fascinating because there's a lot of like misunderstandings and misdirects. Zoe is so rich internally, but he's also very shy and very guarded. And so Leo, who is the most effete, sort of like out there, funny, loudmouthed, brash, sassy kid, thinks Zoe is this total like wet blanket that needs to just be like pulled out of the rut that he's in. And that makes for some really fun scenes between them.
How difficult was it to write that way? I mean, you're kind of having to keep track of a lot of details and make sure you don't tell overlapping parts of the story, right? It's always moving the action along, but you are always getting things from those different perspectives. So how do you embody each of those as you're writing, or was it difficult to embody any of them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if difficult's the word, but definitely complicated and a little scary, to be honest, because, the thing about writing fiction, which you do all by yourself, as opposed to writing, television or writing theater, which is very collaborative, is that I am only armed with my background, my identity, who I am, where I come from. I am me. But if I want to write a book that has a diverse cast that isn't just totally homogenous and about people that are exactly like me, I have to try to extend my sphere of feeling and like stories beyond myself, which can be really scary. And so that's when you make sure you have the right eyes on it to make sure that you've gotten as close as you can. Of course, you can never get all the way there because, that there are certain lived experiences that just are impossible to even imagine, but you can do your best to try to tell a story through, these various eyes. So that part, I would say is complicated and takes a great deal of care. And again, takes some help of like readers. And luckily I had great ones that were hugely helpful. And then in terms of structure and deciding how this would work without like telling every single event through 3 different lenses. I just sort of would like think about what plot points I knew needed to happen and then consider like, who am I really curious about their like point of view on this? Like, and sometimes I would get all the way to the end of a section and then realize like, oh no, actually, like, I think it'd be much more interesting from this character's point of view because of this connection they might make, or I might try it 2 different ways and then pick one. It was really kind of fun actually to, just like I knew what events were coming at the characters, but I was unsure about which character I would sort of zoom in on to show us those events, to share those events with the reader. And that was actually a really fun thing to play with and revise.
So you did a really great job, making these characters feel real, making the world feel lived in a very short amount of time. Like I felt there. But we also have the fantasy element to it, right? The spooky element.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from in your background, and what kind of experience do you have writing that perspective?
Yeah. So I mentioned that part of the inspiration for this story, the why of it, was these very real lessons in queerness, in history, in queer boyhood that I wanted to impart, and I wish that I'd had. But I didn't want the book to just be like fully taking your medicine, like a historical textbook. I wanted it to be the book that I would have needed growing up, but also the book I really would have like wanted and would have been obsessed with. So I just was always obsessed with and drawn to the paranormal. I loved like Goosebumps books, R.L. Stine, and then I moved into Stephen King as I got older, and I love watching horror, and I'm very drawn to the occult, and spooky season. Fall's my favorite. Spooky stuff is my favorite. And I actually think that occultism and witchcraft is a really great symbol for queerness, right? Like witches are others. They are othered by their communities, but they don't let that defeat them. That's the source of their power, actually. And they find others like them, and they make these covens, and they generate this power to like sort of push back against this oppressive patriarchy. And the sort of secrets, the secret nature of like occult societies reminds me of the sort of coded nature of like earlier queer language and symbols. And I just saw a lot of connection there between the like witches as a symbol and queer people as a people. Especially in the 90s, pre-social media, sort of full representation in the media. And so it just seemed like fun. It just seemed like it could be useful as a symbol, but also could just be like a fun and cool way to draw the story forward and sort of up the stakes beyond just a totally standard non-paranormal school narrative. And I wanted to do that. And the Backstagers, my middle grade series, is also quite like paranormal, maybe a little spooky, but for a middle grade audience. So I was excited to kind of like not only play in that arena more, but play in it for a YA audience where you can do a little more, where it can be kind of truly scary sometimes, as opposed to like spooky and there's ghosts, but they're friendly ghosts. So, like, oh no, these are demons. This is actually, I think, quite scary sometimes. I tried to scare myself writing it.
You talked a little bit about the YA element of it, and remind me if we've already talked about this or if this was just in the green room. But what was it like trying to write a YA novel? You know, you get I think there were maybe 5 F words in one paragraph, which as not a big YA reader, I don't always know what to expect. Like, what level of maturity in the language and the content am I getting with it? But this is definitely on the upper scale of YA in certain regards.
Yeah. Again, I come back to that word, like unflinching. I wanted to have these characters speak the way like I and my friends spoke when I was this age, and yeah, going through this stuff. And luckily, I received very, very little direction from my editor and the publisher about that, about like what was, what was okay or not okay in terms of language, in terms of content for YA. Really, it was the most guidance that I got was actually about voice and about like the immediacy of it. Like I actually, when I submitted the sample pages to have the book published, it was in the third person, omniscient, and it was like from out here. And they were like, for YA, we really want to go inside. We really want it to be like, I did this. And you can stay in the past tense, but it doesn't want to feel like they're speaking from 30 years in the future. It was like, this was last year. Like for YA, we want to, there's an immediacy that works for the genre where it's all brand new. And that way that when you're this age, everything is brand new and you're discovering things and you're sort of still processing them with wide open eyes. That was more the directive I got than like, you only get 5 F words, no one can have sex, like anything like that. It was really like, yeah, no, I had free reign to let these characters feel real to me, which I really appreciate.
I think what's cool about your book is that you kind of got away with both. Is that like not only do you have that immediacy, but the way that you structure, especially Zoe's narrative, there is that sort of detachment and self-omniscient viewpoint.
Yeah, so it is told, we are in the past tense. It's in the first person past tense. And the reason for that will reveal itself. I don't want to give it away, but there's a reason for it. And so, yeah, there are moments where the characters can sort of they can kind of step out from the narrative for a second and say like, if only I'd done something differently, or if only I knew this was coming, which I just think it kind of adds some level of dread to me that worked for like the horror genre of it all. You feel something bad coming because they're sort of guideposting that like something is coming. And I think
it feels very literary. I think you used that word earlier, which is fun. But like I said, I think from page 1, you do have that moment of dread, but then you're quickly sucked away from it by the beauty of the language that you use and the characters that you create. And then it sneaks up on you again at a certain point, and then you're lulled away. So you did a great job with it.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted it to not be any one thing for too long. I wanted to sort of like keep you on your toes reading it.
Let's see. So what is your writing process like? Especially with this book, which was so complicated.
Yeah. So I am a big outliner. I've learned in as I go to more and more book things, more like author events and stuff like that, because I am new-ish to this world. I have a whole other life where I had a whole other career for many years. And I've always been writing and been a writer, but I'm pretty new still to like writing books and having them published and talking about them. And I've learned from talking to other like career authors that this is all they do, and they went to school and all this stuff, that you can sort of like outline a novel, or you can pants a novel, they call it, which is like by the seat of your pants. You're just like, what's going to happen to them today? I don't know. Like, let's see where this takes me. I can't do that. I would talk about nothing for 400 pages probably. So I'm a big outliner. I spend the most time on the outline, like sometimes years. And really keep editing the outline so that I'm really certain of the plot points and what they mean and why they're there. And then once I sort of feel like that's in a state of completion and I've shown it to my editor, who sort of signs off as well, she asks her questions about it, we come up with sort of a finalized outline, then I start the actual like iteration of the text, of the prose, of writing it, which that's where I sort of surprise myself. Like that's where I know I need to get to point B, but as you sort of like put yourself in the minds of these characters, especially if you know them well, you just start to get curious about what they might get curious about. And then you're like off on some tangent you had no idea you were going to go on, just in their thoughts, which is really fun. And so to kind of constrain that and to just keep myself moving, I usually, I try to write every day with some scheduled days off. And when I sit down to write, I just try to do 1,000 words. Like I set a word count timer. And I'm like, if I can get 1,000, great. If I feel inspired to like keep going, I'll keep going. But I won't push it either, because like, then I can schedule out like, okay, I know I need a minimum of like, I forget what, like 70,000 words.
80,000.
Something like that was the minimum for this. And I knew I had a set amount of time. So I was like, okay, I can, as long as I keep to 1,000 a day, I can get there. And I would end up doing a lot more, and then I had more time to revise. But that was like my baseline. Even on the days when I was like, I have nothing to give today, I'm gonna just like bang out 1,000, even if they're the 1,000 worst words you've ever read. I'll go back and fix it, but I'll at least have been like pushing toward that goal.
All right, 2 last questions for me, and then we'll switch over to audience questions. We got a good selection there. What was it like researching this? Because you do have so many diverse perspectives, a lot of references throughout to a variety of things. What did you find it difficult to do the research? And is there something that you did research that you're sad didn't make it into the book?
That's a great question. I am a real nerd about this kind of stuff. So, a lot of these references and the history involved was already sort of in my brain, because, I just am of an age and of an interest level in this stuff, queer stuff, especially, that I seek it out. I seek out this material and both culturally and historically. So I knew some of the things I wanted to impart, but I read How to Survive a Plague, which is a book about ACT UP and the AIDS crisis, which is, again, we're in 1991. So while this is a story set at this pretty isolated, very, privileged, rarefied boarding school in rural Massachusetts, that's out there. Like the crisis is happening. And is at the fringes of these boys' consciousness. And so that becomes important to the narrative. I watched a lot of movies. I listened to a lot of music. The music was really fun to just like have that soundtrack going. Like, oh, what are these kids excited about right now? Like, what is the music? And there's enough references in here. I feel like you could make yourself a really great little playlist for 1991 gay party if you just follow the references there. And something that is very much in the book, but isn't named in the book, that I hope people get curious about. Again, without giving too much away, I have to be careful about what I say here, but there was something that happened at Harvard in the 20s, where there was a secret gay society in the 20s. And something happened to that society. And it was a big deal at Harvard, obviously, a big deal, especially for the time. And there's a book called The Secret Court that was really instructive and sort of an inspiration to kind of retell that story in this new 90s paranormal, like really abstracted context. But a lot of the core of the events of this book came from that real life thing. And so if people finish this and get curious about that, I hope they check it out.
Oh, muted myself. Sorry. Yeah. We're going to have to specify the 1920s because the young kids these days are pointing out that this is also the 20s.
We are in the 20s. Yes. So this was 100 years ago. That's crazy. that this stuff was happening. And so, yeah, I hope you get curious about it.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And my last question, since I think this is your first tour event for this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, a little premature, but what do you wish people would ask you about this book, or you as a writer?
Oh my gosh. I wish they would ask me, if they're curious about such things, how they can start writing professionally, because as I mentioned, I have come to this world kind of through the side door a little. I'm not going to say late in life, because I don't think I'm like an old man, but like I didn't like set out on this path. Like, I want to be a novelist. I am a novelist. I like am going to go to undergrad and then grad school and then like do the thing and query the agents and do all the things. I don't have an agent. I'm somehow really good at being in the right place at the right time, and talking to the right people and being bold about, my ideas and not being scared of them. When I wrote my first Backstagers book, I had never written a book before. I'd written some like short stories, in college and for myself, but not, certainly not like full length book, trying to get it. All this to say that, like, if you have passion for this, and if you're someone who loves to write and to read and loves books and thinks you want to make books, you can do that. Like, I think it's very easy to feel like this is some like locked away world that is, impossible to approach. And I will say I'm very aware that I got very, very lucky, and this does not work this way for most people. But just from a sheer self-confidence level, like, if I can do it, you can do it, is what I'm saying. And so I would love to impart that to anyone out there that likes to write.
That is always a great thing to hear, because there is that perception that you have to be locked away in an attic somewhere, just toiling away, and devoting your life to it, when most great writers aren't writers first. They're, Kafka was an actuary or something, an insurance person.
Yeah, I wrote most of Fraternity like full time because it was the height of the pandemic. It was like I started it in the spring of 2020. But all the Backstagers books I wrote at my other job. Like, I wrote like in green rooms and stuff. In backstage, literally. And so, yeah, that is how it works a lot of the time.
All right. Well, let's get through some of these audience questions. And the first one, which may be a spoiler, depending on how you answer, but
do my best.
Did you experience any haunting things at the school?
So, like, yes and no. There was a girl in my class. So it was a school of artists, 200 artists across various media, and there were about like maybe 15 actors, co-ed. And so there was a girl in my acting class who caught wind of this ghostly past of this school and the various hauntings that happen. I have no idea how, because again, this was like the internet existed. I'm making myself sound like I'm 1,000, but like, you had to really like know where to look for things. And so she started a club of like ghost hunters. And so we would like research in like the school library on like their dial-up internet. We would like, read stories about these ghosts, and we try to find the places on campus, and we try to like contact them, which felt very like spooky and fun and cool at the time, but like nothing made contact. I'm sorry to say. I did not see any ghosts there at the school, but I hope I hope they are there, and I hope they're happy.
The mystery persists then.
Yes.
So this next question comes from Brennan, and I'm excited to hear this too as an avid audiobook listener, but you recorded the audiobook. Is that true?
That is true.
What was that like?
It was awesome because, as I mentioned, there are 3 rotating narrators, and the powers that be who produced this audiobook were very gracious to allow they approached me about reading the book, which I love to do. Again, I'm an actor. I like to kind of put a performance into my written words, but it didn't feel right to me to read all of them. And I only wanted to read one of the three. And they were like, okay, they said yes to inviting in 2 more narrators. And those 2 narrators happened to be 2 of my like dearest friends from New York, brilliant actors who also were my authenticity readers for the 2 characters that they're reading. So they knew those characters intimately. They were sort of in my mind as I was creating those characters, and they're incredible actors. And I think I haven't heard it yet because I just recorded it and sent it off. But we also were able to, there was a small budget for some interstitial music, and I got this composer that I love to write some music, especially for the book. So I think it's going to be a really like cinematic, really narrative experience. It's not me just sort of, reading the words. I think like you have 3 actors reading it, and I think all 3 of us have an experience that is close to the experience of those characters. So there is a personal connection there, and there's some cool music, and I think it's going to be a real treat. I hope that, even if you get yourself a paper copy, I hope you check out the audiobook too, because I think it's going to be like a very different experience from reading it.
And the cool thing is you can still support independent bookstores if you get your audiobook through Libro FM.
Hey, that's
store. Yeah.
Great.
People would like to know who the other readers are.
Yeah, that's a great question. The other readers are Daniel K. Isaac and Kyle Beltran, who are theater folks. If you're in the theater world, you know who they are. Daniel also plays a character on the show Billions on Showtime. And Kyle does all sorts of TV and movies, but I can't name any of them off the top of my head. But they're 2, I've known them for years. We sort of came up together in the city, and they're really brilliant. I'm really excited for them.
I know my wife is watching right now. She's probably like, oh, I know who those are, who those people are. So let's see. Oh, and very cool to hear about the interstitial music. I listened to Padawan by Kirsten White this weekend, and it had like Star Wars backing music to it through a lot of it. And I was like, first of all, I have to slow it down because usually I do like 1.5, 1.7 speed. Like, okay, this is taking away from the ambiance here. I need to slow it down, but it's really cool, like just to have that the ambiance, and I'm sure in a spooky book that is even more of an effect.
Yeah, and it's sort of, I think it has a spooky feel, and it has kind of a 90s feel. It has kind of a grunge feel. So I think it gives you like both the autumnal, spooky season, dark academia like vibes, but also gives you the period. I think I was really impressed I think this is really like premium treatment for an audiobook. I think it's going to feel really like well produced. I think so. I'm really excited.
I will have to go back and listen to it. Sounds like a completely different experience.
Totally.
So do you prefer, this is from Kim, do you prefer writing in the first or the third person?
First, I learned. So the Backstagers are all in the third person. And as I mentioned before, I approached this first in the third person because I had this really like broad vision at the beginning. Like when I was really first considering the book, I really wanted to like every single chapter was going to focus on a different character, even if you meet them for like 10 minutes. Like there's a school secretary that had like a whole chapter where you learned her like whole life story. I was really trying to make an epic where like you really got to know every single person. That was not possible. And then when I was sort of guided, thankfully by my editor to like zero in on our core cast and put it in the first person, getting inside their heads in that way and getting to go on those tangents and getting what we were talking about before, the ability to like see things solely from their perspective or hear their internal monologue, even if that would be totally unavailable to someone else, like a character like Zoe, who's very quiet in his, external life, but so rich internally. That's something that's only really possible in books. So I love that. Actually, it taught me something about, like why this is a book and not anything else, and how to take advantage of its form to do something you can only do in prose writing.
Do you think about, are you translating between mediums as you're writing? Like, are you thinking like, how would I stage this? Or, you know, if I were saying this, how would I be performing it?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, I love prose writing as an actor because it is kind of this great synergy of like everything. Like when you approach a script as an actor, your job is to sort of like the words are in front of you. You can't write that. What you're writing as the actor is the internal process that's making you say those words, right? Like the internal monologue is yours to write. It's yours to create. And it's only you know this, right? And so when I'm writing prose, I sort of see it in my head. I see what it looks like. I feel what it feels like. I know what needs to happen because I plotted it out before. And then I have the lines of dialogue, like I know what the characters need to say, but then like you begin to kind of perform it in your head as you're writing it because you're putting yourself in that character. And that's what leads you down those like thought tangents that if you were like performing it as a script would just be useful for you in giving an authentic performance that's like grounded in reality. But in prose, I think it's quite interesting to actually like share with the audience. Like you can actually like write that stuff down and turn it in, and it's work that everyone can see, as opposed to just like it's for me to know and for you to feel, but not actually know, you know, what's going on.
Actors talk about having like a character secret, and you get to share it in this medium,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. Actors do so much work that no one ever knows about, and it does have to do with thought processes. Like, what is this character thinking? Why their motivation? Why are they doing this? What is making them say that line? And now, like all that work, I get to, you know, design the set by writing, you know, setting. I get to compose the dialogue, and I get to like play every part and like include that thought process. So it kind of is like everything when it comes to story. It's the purest storytelling I can think of.
Nice.
Yeah.
So this question's from DJ. What is something that brought you joy while writing this book?
That's a great question. I would say because of the time that I wrote it in, having something to show up for every day. Because again, I really finally had time to tackle this story that I had been kind of chewing on for years because of everything shutting down during the pandemic and my whole acting life kind of like turning off for a year. And that is a really scary thing. I think, you know, we all experience this to varying degrees, but for any of us who work in like freelance artistic arenas, it was very scary because even when you don't have an acting job, you hopefully have like auditions or classes or just like ways to feel like you're kicking the can forward and making progress. But then when all that stops, it's like, oh, I truly don't know like if and when I'm ever going to do this again. And so then when I, you know, had this book to sit down and work on, it was something to like get up, get out of bed, make coffee and sit down at a desk for and work on from, you know, 9 to 5 or whatever I chose to do that day, every day. And that was really necessary, more so than I think I even realized at the time. I really needed that structure and routine. And it actually taught me something about, you know, like moving forward when I am more focused on my acting side and when I'm between things, just to like bring myself to the desk and try to write something, anything, even if only to have the schedule, even if it's work that no one ever sees or it's not amounting to anything. I think like that's just good for me. The sort of like waiting for things to happen is like not cute anymore. And I prefer to stay busy.
Yeah, finding a purpose during that time was really important. And there's also been a big boom in kind of spooky horror books since then. And I can't put the two together. I don't know if there's a correlation.
Yeah.
No trauma or horror to work through from that time at all.
Certainly not.
All right, so this next question is from Madeline, and feel free not to answer it, but she asks, can you talk about your own experience realizing that you were queer and coming out? Or maybe talk about that, in the context of the book with some of the characters.
Yeah, totally. So I was a really late bloomer. I was not interested in anybody really until a very late age in my teens. I was really only interested in like Final Fantasy and Shakespeare. And then I developed a crush, but at the same time, and this is something that I really can't like explain. I don't have the language. I'm not a scientist or a gender studies or queer, professor of any kind. But like, even though there was no sexuality tied to myself, I was really queer. I was a real little homo. Like I was really effeminate. I was interested in all the things that are stereotypically for queer boys. Like I loved musicals. I loved The Wizard of Oz. I loved the girl in the video game. I'd always play as the girl, there was something undeniable. I had an S, like I spoke a certain way that I couldn't break no matter what I did. I hated sports, no interest, no ability. And I was a stereotype, even though that wasn't tied to any behavior, I had no sexuality, but I had a sexuality. It was really strange. And then my first crushes were on female friends. And that led to my first fledgling, physical experiences. But at the same time, I was starting to really notice my attraction to lots of people, lots of kinds of people. And that was really confusing. And especially as a boy who is trying to assimilate, like trying so desperately to be like everybody else so as to be safe and accepted and feel like one of the guys, it was really confusing when I would see like a guy that I found attractive. I was like, oh, do I want that person? Do I want to like kiss that person, or do I want to be that person? And that was really hard to know the difference between for a really long time. I would be like, oh, I'm looking at this body on this Calvin Klein like underwear box because it's inspiration for I think I literally put this in the book. Like it's just inspiration for the gym. It's like I'm just, it was really confusing. And so I was I had a high school girlfriend. I had a college girlfriend. I had a post-college girlfriend, and I had never had any experience with boys or, male identifying folks of any kind. And I didn't feel a lack of that. I always say to people that I am an interesting case because I never felt closeted. I was like fully accepted, like whatever I was going to be fine with my family. I knew this. They were like a very cool, very open-minded, very supportive family. And I was growing up in the arts. So even though I was like bullied relentlessly in my public high school, then I would go to my like extracurricular acting stuff and be the life of the party, and everyone was cool and all my teachers were queer, and it was like nothing. So I had no like shame that I could clock consciously. And actually like a great deal of my shame came from this confusion and like this feeling of like, oh, if I do like cross the aisle and like come out, will everyone sort of roll their eyes and say like, well, duh, like we always knew, or, like that thing people do when people come out where they're like, we knew before you did. And it's like, that doesn't make me feel better. And yeah, then it wasn't until I was 24 years old that I finally kissed a boy in earnest and realized like, oh, here we go. Not that the other stuff wasn't true, but that there was a bigger truth for me, that there was a fuller identity that I just like hadn't awakened to yet. And yeah, because of the lack of representation, and any representation that was there was quite like negative or like sort of patronizing about identities beyond like gay and straight. It was a confusing thing for me, and it took longer than it should have. Whereas like, I feel like if I was growing up now where there's like a great deal of comfort and a lot of language around fluidity and around bisexuality and pansexuality and all these things, I just would have, I would have had an easier time of it. I would have had a lot less shame and confusion, and I would have probably like enjoyed myself a little more. But you know, I have no regrets. Like these experiences crafted me into who I am and gave me a book to write. And so, yeah, it's all good.
Well, thank you for sharing that and for putting so much of that into Zoe and these characters.
Thank you.
A couple more questions in our few minutes. Are you dressing up for Halloween? And what was your favorite Halloween costume?
Oh my gosh. I hope I'm dressing up for Halloween. I am going to be doing some acting around then in a city that is not my home. And so I don't know yet. But I hope so. I hope I get invited to a party and I can go and I'm not too scared of getting COVID, although I just had COVID the week before last. And so I'm good for a little while, I hope. But I don't know who I'm going to be yet if I can dress up. My favorite Halloween costume that I can think of is when I was doing a show called Spring Awakening on Broadway. My cast got invited to this big Halloween party for like Broadway. And we had like 2 seconds to throw together a costume. And I was doing the show with this actor named Ali Stroker, who is now she was famous already. She had been on the Glee project. And since then, she's won a Tony. She was the first wheelchair user to win a Tony. She was the first wheelchair user to be on Broadway at the time that we were doing this show. She's an amazing person, also an author. Ali Stroker, check her out. We were like, what are we going to be? What are we going to be? And then we came up with this idea to be E.T. and Elliot on the bike. So like she took like a crate and like cut the back of it and the bottom of it out. So she kind of put it around herself and like wrapped herself in a blanket and put a light on her finger and did sort of like a spacey alien makeup. And then I just got like a red hoodie and I got handlebars from the back of a bike and put them on her chair and kind of dirtied my face up a little bit. And so we were E.T. and Elliot and like her chair was the wheels of the bike. And when people saw us coming down the street, they were like screaming in delight. It was so fun. And we just had a blast. We danced the night away and it was a really good time.
That is amazing. Thank you to whoever asked that question. I don't know if I caught who it was. All right, so we're almost at the top of the hour. This has flown by, and I'm sorry to everyone whose questions we didn't get to. But let's end with our standard questions, which is, are you going to keep writing in this universe, or is this a standalone, which is someone had also asked that. And what should we expect next from you from a literary perspective?
Oh, man. I hope to keep writing in this universe. I envisioned it as a standalone when I first started it. What I will say is that I had to actually shave a lot of the story down just to fit. There was a minimum word count. There was also a maximum word count, and I was quickly approaching it. And it was also just getting huge in terms of the scope of the story. And so there is more story to tell. And should there be enough interest, and I hope that there is, I would love to have the opportunity to tell it. And so I hope so, is what I'll say. But I also think that it does stand alone really nicely. I think it's a really complete story. And so if it ends up just being what it is, I'm very proud of it. And I think it stands on its own just fine. And next from me, literarily, I don't really know in terms of prose, but I will say that I am working on something for the stage again. I years ago wrote a musical called Burn All Night that was produced by the American Repertory Theater, which was my first experience being produced as a playwright. And since then, I've been wanting to take another crack at something fresh and hadn't had the right idea. And now I think I do. And I'm working with some really amazing people on making something new for the stage, where I would be the writer, not in it. I can sit back in the audience and freak out back there instead of freaking out on stage. And so I hope I have more to share about that soon. And so that's what my writing world is like right now. But I want to write more. As soon as I finished Fraternity, I was like, I will never do that again. It is so hard and so like long and frankly kind of lonely to write books, to write a novel, whereas I'm very used to like collaborative creative processes, and it's really hard. You're there for every single syllable, every keystroke, you're there. and you do the whole thing. You do it multiple times, and it's really hard. And then as soon as you like get the thing in your hand, you're like, oh, maybe I do want to do it again. And so I'm thinking about a few things, and I'm waiting for one to kind of bubble to the top. So stand by.
Well, that is all the time we have. Thank you so much to Andy for joining us. And thank you so much to our audience and for all the great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but please do go out, buy the book from an independent bookstore, get the audiobook from Libro FM here. Andy and his friends read it. You're going to absolutely love Fraternity. It is such a well-written story and funny and spooky. And I'm so glad to have been able to host you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for your great questions. I'm really excited to share this with you. Thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps it up. And actually, wait. If you do order from Mysterious Galaxy, you do get a signed book plate from Andy.
Ding, ding, ding.
And so, yeah, you can get that at the little button below. So please do that. And yeah, that's my last pitch.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. And good luck on the launch.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye.
Bye.